My name is Isabel Turner, 36 years old, a freelance illustrator living in Oregon. That day, I was sitting in the waiting room for my biopsy results when my phone buzzed, an email from the bank. Savings account balance $0. Withdrawn by Matthew Turner, my husband. The same man who had just sent me a cold message. Don't contact me again. I'm starting over with Whitney. Good luck. I didn't know what hurt more, losing every cent or losing all trust. We had spent 10 years saving for our daughter's future, and he vanished, taking everything, right when I had no health insurance and was facing a potentially serious illness. Have you ever been betrayed at the exact moment you needed someone the most? If this story speaks to you, leave a comment, share your experience, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss what happened when I exposed the man who used to be my husband and protected my daughter with the very things they once looked down on. Silence, drawings, and quiet determination. Let me tell you how it all began. I met Matthew in the fall I turned 27 at a graphic design seminar in Seattle. He was the keynote speaker. I was one of the attendees with a sketchbook always by my side. That day, in a crowd full of people speaking in ad jargon and numbers, he was the only one who walked over, pointed at a messy doodle in my notebook and said, "This idea could sell an entire campaign." I fell in love with him at that moment, not because of the sweet line but because of the way he looked at my drawing, as if it had value. We got married just 6 months later. The early years of our marriage were filled with late-night meals by the laptop, split bills, and laughter echoing through a tiny apartment in East Portland. I worked at a small design firm. He did marketing for a startup. I was the more stable one, both financially and in direction. For the first 5 years, I paid most of the rent, the car, and saved little by little in our joint account. Then Ruby came along. She was the most beautiful thing I'd ever drawn in my life. But from that moment, everything changed. I chose to step away from office life and freelance so I could spend more time with our daughter. Matthew got promoted not long after thanks to a campaign whose core idea came from a bedtime story I'd made up for Ruby. He asked me if he could use the imagery and the storytelling for his pitch. I said yes, without hesitation. After all, we were a team, right? But that's when the roles between us began to shift. Matthew became the provider, and me? I became the one who stayed home and drew. My mother-in-law, Linda, never missed a chance to point that out. "The drawings are nice to hang on a wall, Isabel, but they're not going to pay for Ivy League tuition," she said once at dinner, as I proudly shared that one of my children's illustrations had been published in a magazine. Matthew smiled. No defense, no disagreement. He was always like that, silent, but that silence gradually scratched at me like invisible fingernails. Still, I tried to believe. I believed Matthew was under work pressure, that his mother's words didn't change how he saw me, that he was still the man who once kissed me in the rain-soaked streets of Seattle and whispered, "I never believed in fate until I met you." But then his phone was suddenly password protected. He came home late saying the client was difficult. And one time, I accidentally saw a hotel charge on the card statement in Portland, where we lived. When I asked about it, Matthew shrugged. That night we had a late team meeting. The company booked a room so we wouldn't have to drive back. I remember laughing, a soft, tired laugh. Not because I believed him, but because I didn't want to escalate it. If I doubted him, I'd have to act. And I wasn't ready to face the fact that the life I built might be falling apart. That night, I held Ruby to sleep, resting my hand on her chest, trying to calm myself with the rhythm of her breathing. I whispered to myself, "It's fine. I'm fine. It's work stress. He's probably exhausted. Matthew still loves me." Then, a week later, I found a plum-colored lipstick stain on the collar of his white dress shirt. It wasn't mine. I don't wear that shade. I put the shirt in the wash, as if scrubbing it would erase the suspicion. But inside, something had already cracked. I still didn't do anything, didn't say anything. I kept drawing, kept cooking dinner, writing notes for Ruby's lunchbox. But in every brushstroke, in every handwritten word, I started layering in the quiet sadness of a woman slowly falling apart without anyone noticing. Was I being overly sensitive? Was everything off rhythm because I had stepped back, or because I wasn't as attractive as before? That question gnawed at me. On the nights he didn't come home, in the moments when Ruby asked, "Mommy, why didn't Daddy come to my performance today?" I replied, "Daddy's busy with work, sweetheart. He loves you very much." But I wasn't sure I still believed that. And I had no idea that right at the moment I was blaming myself with all that guilt and doubt, Matthew was already planning the cleanest disappearance of his life. I used to think that if the day came when Matthew left, at the very least he would look me in the eye and say it. We had been together for 10 years, had a child and a home full of small imprints of our life together. Ruby's marker stains on the hallway wall, the wedding photo still hanging in the kitchen. I thought that even if he betrayed me, he'd still be the kind of man who wouldn't erase everything like a thief. I was wrong. 2 days after that good luck message, I received a strange envelope in our old mailbox downstairs. Matthew had always been the one to pick up the mail. At first I thought it was junk, but when I opened it, it was a copy of a lease agreement for an apartment in Palm Springs. A luxury unit with a private pool and tennis court, along with school enrollment paperwork for a private academy in California, under the name Ruby Turner, listed guardian, me. The signature was crooked, rigid, nothing like my handwriting, but it was there, next to my name, clear and capitalized. Isabel M. Turner. It felt like a slap across the face. Matthew had prepared everything: the new apartment, the new school, a brand new identity, single, child-free, to start his perfect new life, without me. I collapsed into the chair, the document still trembling in my hand. Ruby was coloring behind me, humming softly to "You Are My Sunshine." I looked at her, that innocent face, and something inside me broke wide open. Not only anger, but fear. Matthew wasn't simply leaving. He was planning to take Ruby. I turned over the school file. At the bottom of the notes section, I saw a handwritten line. Enrollment date pending parental agreement. Parental agreement? How could I agree to something I didn't even know about? And why forge my signature unless he intended to do this without telling me? I called the school immediately. The administrator's voice was calm and polite. "Oh yes, we received Ruby's file 2 weeks ago. Mr. Turner said you'd be in touch after confirming the move. All the paperwork is complete, except for your final approval." I never submitted anything, and I did not agree to transfer my daughter anywhere. There was a pause on the other end. "We'll pause the process immediately," she said, now sounding tense. I apologize for the confusion. I hung up. The room suddenly felt small and suffocating. I stepped out onto the balcony, gripping the documents like living proof. My eyes burned. Not from tears, but from one cruel, simple question. If I hadn't found out, would Matthew really have taken Ruby away? That night, after putting Ruby to bed, I opened my laptop and searched the name of the apartment from the lease. The Palm Springs unit was part of an exclusive gated complex with strict security. On the real estate site, I saw Matthew had signed a 1-year lease paid 3 months in advance. Listed under resident info: marital status, single, children, no. No wife, no child. I kept digging through my email, checking folders Matthew had helped organize 2 months ago. In an old folder called Paperwork, I found a scanned copy of the school transfer form with my name and a forged signature. It was sent from a strange email address but CC'd to Matthew as the listed reference. I felt the blood in my body turn cold. This wasn't emotional betrayal anymore. This was a scheme, a detailed plan premeditated with assistance and identity fraud. He intended to erase me from the story of his life. No confrontation, no actual divorce, only vanishing. Taking my child, my assets, and leaving me with a trail of unanswered questions. I opened my notebook, the one I usually filled with impulsive sketches and scattered thoughts from the day. The blank page stared back at me like a challenge. I picked up my pen and wrote a single line. No one is allowed to take my child from me. I needed to find a lawyer. I knew what I could do with forged documents like that, and I needed to understand my rights and Matthew's weak points. If he had forged my signature once, he could do it again. I was standing in the kitchen, holding Ruby's half-finished glass of orange juice when my phone rang. The screen showed Linda Turner. I hesitated a few seconds before picking up. The last time I spoke to her was last Christmas, when she came to stay for 3 days, but spent 2.5 of them criticizing my parenting, how I didn't support Matthew enough, and how my dinner lacked proper protein. "Hello, Linda," I said, keeping my tone calm. A dramatic sigh rang out immediately from the other end. "Isabel, you really can't keep going like this." I gripped the glass tighter. "Going like what, Linda?" Putting so much pressure on Matthew that he had no choice but to walk away from everything. Do you know, he was nearly depressed because you never supported his dreams. You made him feel like a failure in his own home. I stood still, eyes on the window where Ruby was drawing chalk pictures on the ground below. "His dreams?" I asked, trying to stay composed. "Do you mean the dream of cheating on his wife, draining the joint account, forging documents, and planning to take Ruby without saying a word?" Linda went silent for a beat, then spoke quickly. "Matthew told me you threatened to keep Ruby from him unless he kept sending you more money every month. He said you were using her to manipulate him." "It's awful, Isabel." "How many messages did I send?" I asked. "And you believed it?" "You've always been the emotional fragile one. Matthew needs stability, space to grow. You kept him tied down to a role he didn't want anymore." "Did you know Matthew was planning to take Ruby?" I asked slowly. "Did you know, Linda? Did you know your son forged my signature, enrolled her in a school in another state, and declared himself single with no children?" Linda didn't answer. Then she let out another sigh. "I know my son isn't perfect, but you're not blameless either. A real woman who knows how to hold a family together wouldn't have let things get to this point." He hung up. The next day, I went to my post-biopsy follow-up appointment. The nurse called my name and led me into the doctor's office with a slightly sympathetic look. I sat down on the cold vinyl chair, forcing a polite smile. Dr. Ellen, around 50 with a warm and steady voice, opened the folder in front of her. "Isabel, the results don't indicate a clearly malignant tumor, but there are some irregularities. We'll need to monitor it over the next 3 months. I'm still covered under Medicaid, right?" Dr. Ellen hesitated. "There's an issue," she said. "Your records show that coverage was interrupted due to a change in marital and financial status." "I haven't changed anything." "There's a new income declaration stating that you're single with no children and that your freelance earnings exceed the qualifying threshold. That's what caused the denial." I remained frozen, struggling to breathe. "Matthew!" It was him again. I left the clinic, my head spinning with numbers, policies, and a quiet heartbreak I couldn't name. I didn't know if I had enough money to continue monitoring the condition or even to afford medication if I needed it. I walked through the parking lot under the Oregon drizzle, wondering how many more traps Matthew had laid that I hadn't discovered yet. I turned the car around and drove straight to Matthew's old office. The glass high-rise in downtown was still lit up. I walked into the lobby and pressed the elevator to the 14th floor, where he had worked for 4 years. The young receptionist looked up and gave a polite nod. "Who are you here to see?" "Matthew Turner," I said. She frowned, checking the list. "Mr. Turner resigned 2 months ago," she said gently. "His last working day was 12 weeks ago." I frowned. "He told me he still worked here. He's still receiving paychecks from this company." "Received a severance package," the receptionist added carefully. "I'm not allowed to disclose financial details, but from what I understand, it was unusually large." I gave a dry laugh. Of course it was unusually large. He must have been planning his exit for a long time, coordinating with the company, the bank, and now even the government to cut off my health care. I thanked her and stepped out into the hallway. My hand was clenched so tight on my purse strap that my knuckles turned white. Matthew had quit, taken a payout, falsified information to terminate my medical insurance, and prepared a new apartment, a new school for our daughter, without saying a word. Each puzzle piece was coming into view. This wasn't a spontaneous escape. It was planned, calculated, and wrapped in a victim narrative to convince his mother I was the one who destroyed everything. But this time, I was done sitting silently while they rewrote the story on my behalf. It took me a week to mentally recover from everything I had uncovered. A week with no Matthew, no savings, no insurance, and no illusions left about the man who once promised to walk beside me for life. I decided to return to the place I once belonged, a small studio in East Portland, where I used to work when I was single. I rented a little upstairs room that still smelled of varnish and dust, but the light from the tall window was as clear as I remembered. I spread my old canvases on the floor, unpacked my box of paints, and began painting again. Children's illustrations, bright, warm, full of metaphors, had always been my way of healing and surviving. Each night after Ruby went to sleep, I'd open my laptop, upload new art to Etsy, work on commissions, tweak prints for customers in Idaho or New York. Some days I sold 3, some days none, but I felt a calm return. Like I was finally reclaiming my own voice. No one else's permission needed. One afternoon, while organizing the boxes Matthew had left in the garage, I found an old USB drive buried at the bottom of a box labeled office supplies. At first, I was going to toss it, but something in me, the part that had learned to question everything after all he'd done, told me to plug it in. The drive loaded slowly. Inside was a folder named private_2023. I opened it. A few Excel files, some scanned documents, and one audio file. Voice memo _July 21. I hit play. Matthew laughed. A clear, smug laugh echoed at the beginning of the recording. "You don't get it, Jared. This is a perfect plan. Clean, legal, no loose ends." Jared's voice, his best friend, who I'd met a couple of times, sounded hesitant. "You're really going to leave without giving her anything?" "I already gave her something," Matthew replied, laughing. "Her name's still on the utility bills. Besides, she's soft. She won't fight back." My throat tightened. I could hear myself breathing harder, my hand instinctively squeezing the mouse. Matthew went on. "I've already set everything up. Bailey's account, backup passport for flying through Mexico, lease in Palm Springs. All that's left is to pull the cash and vanish into a new world." "What about little Ruby?" "You know what?" He laughed again. "She's young, she'll forget." I stopped the recording. My hands were ice cold. I stayed motionless in the room, surrounded by children's artwork. Deer, owls, curly-haired girls holding balloons, all suddenly felt unbearably fragile. That night I sent the recording and all files from the USB to Diane Keller, my old college friend, now a family and civil attorney. We hadn't spoken in nearly 3 years, but when she read my message, Diane responded in under 10 minutes. "Send me everything. Now." We met at a small cafe the next morning. Diane was the same. Messy curls, sharp eyes behind black-rimmed glasses. She plugged in her earbuds and listened to the recording without saying a word. When Matthew mentioned the foreign bank account and second passport, Diane raised her eyebrows. "He's basically recorded evidence of tax evasion, financial fraud, and attempted child abduction," she said flatly. "Do you realize how serious what you're holding is? Do you think we have legal grounds to sue?" "Not sue, Isabel. I think we can freeze his assets, file for temporary custody, and potentially press criminal charges if needed. He didn't abandon his family. He staged a fake narrative to escape accountability." Half of me wanted to breathe a sigh of relief that someone was finally on my side. The other half still couldn't believe any of this was real. Diane continued slowly, her tone carefully weighing each step. "I'll draft an emergency file. But to strengthen the case, Isabel, I need more evidence. Anything on offshore accounts, large transfers, tax filings, internal emails, screenshots. The more the better. I'll find it. I won't let him disappear like he never existed." Diane looked at me and her eyes suddenly softened. "I remember seeing you stand up for a classmate who got pulled from the art department over finances. Just remember one thing. You're not weak. You've never been allowed to use your full strength." I knew the battle ahead wouldn't be easy, but this time I wasn't alone, and I had something Matthew never expected, evidence he recorded himself, proving how he destroyed the very family he once promised to protect. I was folding final prints to ship to a customer when the email arrived. Sender, unknown. Subject, we need to talk. The message was a single sentence. "He did it to me too. He promised marriage, then vanished with my savings. I have the contracts." There was no name, but I knew it was Whitney Brooks. The woman Matthew destroyed my family for. The one who had signed that Palm Springs lease with him. The fresh start he claimed. And now, the next woman left behind. I typed a short reply. If you really want to talk, I'm willing to listen, but only on one condition: complete honesty. And less than 2 minutes later, a new email came in. Subject: he did it to you and now to me. Attached: share transfer agreement, a bank statement showing a $45,000 wire, and a handwritten love letter from Matthew to Whitney promising, "We'll get officially married as soon as I leave Portland." In the upper right corner of the contract was Whitney's clear signature, next to the logo of a company I'd never heard of, Sage Light Ventures, Inc. Beneath it was the signature of Matthew Turner, Chief Executive Officer. I called Diane. "What's going on?" She answered as fast as ever. "Matthew didn't just leave me, he scammed Whitney too, took her money." I told her everything and sent over all the documents. Diane went quiet for a few seconds, then spoke slowly. "Whitney's on the edge. She could help us bring down Matthew's entire scheme, but Isabel, are you sure you want to work with that woman?" I closed my eyes. No, I didn't trust Whitney, but I believed in collapse. When the people once put on pedestals are dragged down, they often become more honest, not out of guilt, but out of fear. "I want to meet her." 3 days later, we met at a quiet cafe in the Alberta district. Whitney showed up on time. She wore an oversized coat, one hand gently resting on her clearly showing belly. Her eyes were dark with fatigue, her skin pale like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. I didn't recognize her as the woman in red heels clinging to Matthew's arm in the fake wedding photo I had seen in the USB. There was no trace of pride in her expression now. "Are you really pregnant?" I asked, cutting straight to it. 11 weeks. "Does Matthew know?" "I messaged him, he blocked me." I looked at Whitney, and the feeling inside me was hard to name. A mix of anger, pity, contempt, and recognition. Like she was a version of me, blind, hopeful, abandoned. "Why did you email me?" I asked. Whitney was quiet for a long time. Then she pulled a folder from her purse. I believed him enough to drain the savings my mom left me when she died. He said it was for the new business, said my name would be on the registration, said he'd marry me. I took the folder and opened it. Inside was a company registration, completely fake. The tax ID had never been linked to any real business. All of it was a front. Whitney continued, her voice trembling. "I found out the company didn't exist when the bank flagged a strange transaction from Panama. I traced it and discovered Matthew used several aliases, even fake passports." I clenched my fists. "Why are you telling me all this?" I asked again. Whitney looked straight into my eyes. "Because I know he'll come back for me. Not because of the baby, but because I know too much. I don't have a lawyer. No one's on my side. I figured, if you're going to bring him down, I can help. But I need protection. I'll talk to Diane. If you provide full documentation and testimony, we'll petition for immunity. But, on one condition, everything must be the truth. Nothing added, nothing withheld." Whitney pressed her lips together, then nodded. "Amiz once said something when he signed the contract with me. I haven't forgotten." She looked down at her cold cup of coffee. "He said, you can't trace anything that's legal if the person on the paperwork is dumb enough." My throat tightened. I didn't know if she was talking about herself or me. But that no longer mattered. I went to the Multnomah County Courthouse on Wednesday morning, holding the file Diane had spent all night preparing. Ruby was still asleep when I left the house. I'd left her with our kind neighbor, Mel, who didn't ask many questions, just squeezed my hand and said, "She'll be okay, and so will you." Diane had arrived early in a deep navy blazer, hair tied back, eyes sharp as a blade. She handed me a printed copy, the emergency petition. It contained everything. The Panama account, the audio recording of Matthew, the fraudulent investment contract with Whitney, and the forged school documents for Ruby. When Matthew walked into the courtroom, I barely recognized him. Wrinkled shirt, unshaven face. But the eyes were the same. Cold, arrogant, and slightly confused, like he couldn't believe it had come to this. The judge was a woman around 60, wearing glasses low on her nose, her voice calm and grounded. As she began, the room fell completely silent. "We're here today to review an emergency petition filed by Mrs. Isabel Turner concerning financial fraud, identity forgery, and violation of custody rights regarding a minor." Diane stood, her tone steady and precise. Your Honor, my client was abandoned along with her 6-year-old daughter, without notice and without access to funds. The respondent emptied their shared savings and transferred it to an offshore account in Panama while falsely declaring bankruptcy. She submitted bank statements, then opened her laptop and played the recording from the USB. In the silence of the courtroom, Matthew's voice rang out clearly. Pull the cash, disappear, then a new world. A few people turned to look at him. Diane continued. We also have an investment contract the respondent signed with a woman named Whitney Brooks, currently pregnant, who was also abandoned and lost her entire savings. This contract was signed under a non-existent company with the intent to defraud. Matthew's attorney objected. Your Honor, my client denies all allegations. He is undergoing mental distress after being emotionally unsupported by his former spouse and was forced to leave his old life to protect himself. The judge didn't flinch. Protect himself by forging his wife's signature and attempting to transfer their child to a new school without legal consent? She asked, flipping through the forged enrollment documents. Matthew's attorney went silent. The judge read through the paperwork for nearly 5 minutes. The air in the room was thick. Every sheet of paper in her hands felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Finally, she spoke. I find sufficient grounds. The court hereby orders a freeze on all assets linked to the Panama account and all major transactions in the past 6 months. Matthew Turner is prohibited from contacting Ruby Turner directly or indirectly until the official custody hearing. Witness Whitney Brooks is to be summoned under whistleblower protection. She struck the gavel. A dry, sharp thud echoed, like a blade slicing through the mask Matthew had worn for years. I didn't look back at him as I left the room. I held Diane's hand tightly and stepped into the hallway. Outside, the rain was misting down. Everything felt cold, damp, and real. So real. Diane turned to me and said softly, "One step. But a big one." I knew the road ahead was long, but for the first time it felt like the largest shadow in my life had finally cracked. And what remained was light. I was arranging wildflowers with Ruby when the phone rang. The screen showed a name I never thought would call again. Linda Turner. I hesitated for a few seconds. Ruby was using her small scissors to trim the lavender I'd planted out back, humming a song she'd learned at school. I didn't want her to hear the voice of the woman who once looked at me like I was a stain on the pristine sheet of her son's life. I walked into the kitchen, gently shut the glass door behind me, and picked up the phone. "Isabel," she began, her voice hoarse, stripped of its usual arrogance. I'm not calling to argue, I just want to talk. As two mothers," she continued, probably unwilling to wait for my agreement. "I know what Matthew did was wrong, deeply wrong, but he's still Ruby's father. I think, instead of dragging this to court, maybe we can find a softer way. For her? You want me to drop the case? I want this family to stop falling apart." Her voice quavered. "If it's about money, I can help. I have a private savings account. I'm willing to send money monthly for Ruby's care. Just stop. Don't press charges against Matthew anymore. He's lost his job, his reputation. He won't survive another hit." I gripped the phone tightly. How interesting. When Matthew vanished with all my money, when I sat alone in a clinic wondering if I had a tumor, when I scraped together money for school, rent, and utilities, no one called about doing it for Ruby. "Are you sure you're doing this for Ruby?" I asked, my voice low. Silence on the other end. "I won't take your money," I said clearly, "and I won't drop the charges." "Isabel, I don't trust you," I cut in, "because I found out you didn't just know everything, you co-signed a foreign transfer contract with Matthew." "Why, Panama account," I said. "Your name's on it, your signature too. I also found a scanned document from Ruby's school. The first sender was an email registered to Linda M. Turner." I heard a wooden chair scrape harshly against the floor on the other end. "You're mistaken," she tried to stay calm. "I didn't know Matthew used my name. He told me to sign it as part of a tax document or something." I let out a dry laugh. "You think I've never handled admin work, Linda? I recognize your signature. You signed with full awareness. You didn't just help him cover it up. You helped forge documents to take my daughter away from me. You don't have proof? I do, I cut her off. I've already sent everything to my lawyer. That afternoon, I sat in my small home office, staring at the screen. The email to Diane showed, read. Attached were the Panama bank statement listing Linda as a secondary holder, a scanned copy of the school email, and a photo of the wire transfer receipt to a fake scholarship fund Matthew had created. My phone rang less than an hour later. It was Diane. You're sure you want to name Linda in the suit? Her voice was slow but steady. I don't want anything, I replied. I want the truth, and for Ruby to be safe. If Linda did nothing wrong, the court will say so. But if she was complicit, she needs to be held accountable. Good. I'll add her name to the petition for expansion. I'm also sending a formal request for investigation to the county prosecutor. My heart was heavy, but my mind had never been clearer. I used to think Linda was a mother blindly protecting her son. Now I knew she wasn't blind. She was complicit. She chose to stand by Matthew, even if it meant trampling me and Ruby in the process. I got to my feet and drew the curtain open. Ruby was outside watering plants with Mel, her laughter floating through the air like sunlight over wounds I hadn't yet healed. I knew the truth had a price, but silence sometimes cost even more. When the court issued its ruling, I didn't cry. The judge read each clause, each line, as if redrawing the structure of a world I once thought was beyond saving. Full custody of minor Ruby Turner is granted to the biological mother Isabel Turner. Matthew Turner is charged with financial fraud, conspiracy to abduct a minor, and tax evasion. Linda M. Turner is prohibited from contacting her granddaughter in any form, and must repay $78,500 for her role in the money transfers and forged documents. Across the courtroom, Matthew stood with his head down, shoulders curled in. Gone was the confident posture that once convinced me he knew what he wanted in life. Whitney's attorney nodded as the civil settlement was approved. She would be reimbursed the full amount she was defrauded, plus damages from the frozen account. She never looked at Matthew once during the proceedings. She stood silently, both hands on her growing belly, a quiet reminder that another life had nearly been drowned in false promises. 1 month after the trial, I unlocked the door to a small upstairs room in a historic row house in the Alberta Arts District, the neighborhood I'd once dreamed of working in as a student. The room was filled with sunlight, warm oak floors and blank white walls waiting for something new. I placed the keyring on the table. On the glass door, a freshly hand-lettered sign read, Ruby's Room, a little place for big imaginations. I used the restitution from Linda and the asset recovery from Matthew to start over, not as a victim being compensated but as a mother choosing to rewrite the story for herself and her daughter. My studio wasn't large, a few low easels, a bookshelf packed with old fairy tales, and a pale blue armchair I found at a flea market. I repainted it by hand, added soft cushions, and saved it for Ruby every weekend. She called it the story chair. Every morning I painted. Every afternoon I taught children's art classes, and in the evenings while Ruby colored beneath my desk, I turned old sketches into storybooks and sent them off to a small press. The first time I saw my name on a cover, illustrations by Isabel Turner, I laughed. Not because of pride, but because, for the first time in years, I was called by my name, without anyone else's shadow attached to it. One day, while rinsing paintbrushes, I heard soft footsteps outside the studio. It was Diane. She stepped in, carrying 2 coffees, placed one on the table, then looked around. This the place you chose to start over? She asked. Not big, I said, but enough for Ruby to run around, and enough for me to breathe. Diane smiled. I came to give you an update. The DA's office just sent a notice. Matthew's being federally indicted for tax evasion and international money laundering. He's looking at a minimum of 5 years. Diane paused, then asked, If you'd known back then how all this would turn out, would you have done it differently? I'd still choose this path, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Because if I hadn't walked through that fire, I wouldn't know I could stand here. And Ruby wouldn't know that her mom fought, not with revenge, but with resilience. I looked out the window. Ruby was sitting on the studio steps, brushing navy blue paint onto a scrap of paper, quietly talking to herself. I knew she was building a whole world, one where her mom wasn't the one left behind, but the one who opened the door to something new. Bent down and kept rinsing my brushes. The paint swirled through the water, fading gently like the last sorrow drifting away. Our first exhibit at Ruby's room took place on a soft Sunday afternoon. I didn't hang complex paintings or display works meant to impress. Every piece on the wall was a fragment of the world we'd survived together. Little birds flying through a canyon, a wooden bridge across a river, a field of flowers with a lone figure and a child walking under sunlight. Children sat drawing at the round table in the center of the room, while the adults stood quietly, admiring the art, whispering things that didn't need to be said aloud. There was something still, something real, like a long sigh finally soothed after a difficult journey. Ruby stood beside me in her blue dress, cheeks flushed, clutching her newest painting. She wasn't shy. She grabbed my hand and pulled me to the middle of the room, then announced clearly to each person there, "This is the painting of me and Mummy, mother and child on the wooden bridge. The water below is deep, but Mummy helped me cross." I paused for a moment. Ruby had painted that one on a rainy evening when she didn't ask to watch cartoons. She quietly settled next to me and whispered, "Mom, the wooden bridge isn't strong, but I trust you." Looking back now, I realize my daughter had felt more than I ever imagined. The times I cried quietly in the bathroom, the times I pretended to be calm, the nights I held her tighter than usual. She saw it all. A woman approached me after studying the painting for a long time. "How did you get through all of it, and still smile like that?" Behind her stood a boy around 8 years old, carefully coloring a purple dinosaur with absolute focus. I smiled, not at the question itself, but because I had quietly prepared my answer a long time ago. "I didn't get through it by staying silent," I said. "I painted, I spoke, I told the story my way. I stopped letting anyone else write it for me." She said nothing more, only gently squeezed my hand, as if that was a kind of reply words couldn't capture. After the exhibit, when most guests had left, Ruby lay curled on the armchair hugging her stuffed bear, letting out a deep childlike sigh after a long day of play. I turned off the overhead light, leaving only the string of warm yellow bulbs draped across the ceiling, like a tiny campfire for an imaginary night outdoors. I lowered myself to the floor and reached for the open watercolor box. I added a few brush strokes to an unfinished piece. A mother standing before a forest, holding a lantern. Behind her was an unclear path, but ahead, there was light. I don't know how many women have walked through darkness like I did. Maybe more than I could guess. Maybe some are sitting in their kitchens now, holding utility bills too tired to cry. Maybe some are painting late into the night just to make rent. Maybe one tomorrow will realize she doesn't need to wait for a miracle from anyone else. We don't get through it by enduring, we get through it by creating something from the wreckage. A painting. A voice. A small room filled with light. And a child who believes her mother is strong enough to lead her through. That's enough. I'm sharing my story not to reopen old wounds, but to say, some losses don't break us. They simply push us to become truer versions of who we were meant to be. I don't know where you are in your journey. Maybe you're picking yourself up from a breakup. Maybe you're quietly holding pain no one else can see. Or maybe you're piecing together scraps of trust after years of being dismissed. But if there's one thing I've learned, from myself, from my daughter, and from women like Whitney Diane and the kind stranger at the exhibit, it's this. When we speak up, the world starts to listen. So if you've ever been forced into silence, ever been pushed out of your own story, share it with me in the comments. I want to know how you got through. Or if you're still walking in the dark, I hope you find your first light in the stories shared here. And if Ruby's and My Journey has touched something in your heart, hit follow so you won't miss the next stories about family, trust, and the quiet, resilient beginnings that change everything.